Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We have arrived at the playoffs for Overwatch League season number 5. This is it. Over the next week, well, 5-ish days, six days, we will finish off this season. A grand champion of the year will be crowned, and this season of Overwatch League will conclude. So, last prediction video. Here we go. We're going to go through the entire thing. Looking at the bracket, we have our top 4 seeds in the Fuel, Dynasty, Shock, and Gladiators with their first round buys. As was the case with the midseason Manus tournament, double elimination. So we drop down to the lower bracket after this is done, and then go from there, and obviously just keep whittling down until we have one team remaining. So the play-ins are done. And, as you can see from the East, you got the Dynasty, the Dragons, the Spark, the Fusion, and then the Dragons. Where are they? Dragons. Went right by them. And then from the West, coming out of that play-in, we had the Defiant and the Mayhem, with Washington and Boston seasons ending there. So we got some interesting matchups round 1, and then obviously we're going to see how it develops afterwards. Once again, the age-old question, which region is better, will be answered. It feels like the East maybe a bit stronger going to this one, to be honest. There's some of the East teams, it's like, feeling a little weird on them. But in any case, Kiriko is here. Will she see a ton of play? I don't think so. It seems like the BAP Zen is starting to pick up a lot of steam again. But who knows what can happen? There's a lot of things that could develop with this meta. A lot of rotation of tanks, with Zarya, D.Va, Winston, who knows what's all going to happen. But without further ado, we are going to get into the predictions. So, winners round 1 going down today in a couple of hours. Philadelphia Fusion taking on London Spitfire. A rematch of the Season 1 Grand Finals. It's pretty cool, actually, that we get to kick off this round of playoffs with that. Completely different teams, of course, than they were in those days. But in any case, this is an interesting one because Philly they've been a solid team all season. Same thing with London. They've been mainstays in the playoffs. They've made it through many times. Haven't had the most success. Philly did get to a grand finals in the kickoff clash. London usually gets in, they win a match, and then they lose 2. So, stylistically, I think they're pretty close. I'm taking Philly in this one. Take that, everyone who says I'm a Philly hater. I'm going to say 3-1. London looks a little shaky on some of the push and some of the hybrids. That's the main thing that scares me a little bit. They look really good on control. So that's a good foothold for them. But I just think Philly is going to win the escort map and the hybrid map. We've seen with London, they vary a little bit, meta to meta. Philly has been a little more consistent. I really like their trio of DPS. It lends to being very, very versatile. So in the end, I think this one is pretty back and forth, but I got Philly taking it down 3-1. After that, we got Hangzhou Spark taking on the Shanghai Dragons. We're going to take Dragons. Spark have obviously looked less than stellar the last few times out. They did make their way into playoffs, so that is, it's an achievement by itself. But I'm going to take the Dragons, and I'm actually going to say 3-0 because I don't predict enough 3 in Overwatch. We know that, 3 in Overwatch, there's a reason it's a saying because it happens a lot. And especially early on in playoffs, I think, when teams are really starting to kind of feel out what's really good, you have nerves for some players. Whatever the case is, I think Shanghai is just better top to bottom than the Spark, and they get the job done. Florida Mayhem versus Atlanta Reign is after that. We got all East teams over here. in this side of the bracket. Oh well, nearly yeah, all of that's crazy in this little side of it. It's all the Eastern teams. Yeah, Eastern. So in any case, Florida Mayhem versus Atlanta Reign. So Florida looked really solid in the play-ins. I think they would definitely build some confidence. I think that's going to help them a lot. But I still think Atlanta's a little bit better. Checkmate playing very well. Someone is really coming into his own on tank. He has great versatility, whether it's playing the Zarya, playing the Winston. They have good coverage right now. But Atlanta's it's a little bit more for me right now. Venom has really played well this season. Kai, is a finalist for MVP. This is a very solid team. Speedily has helped since he joined, and Hawk has been one of the better tanks in the league. Their supports are also set up very well, whether it's for whether it's main support and off support or two off supports. They've definitely got the skills between Ultraviolet, OG, Vigilante has been great since he turned 18 and got inserted into the lineup. So this is a good match. I think these are two teams to very much watch out for. They could make sneaky runs, but even though Florida's had some success lately, I still think Atlanta's just a bit better top to bottom. Toronto Defiant versus Houston. So Toronto ends up, some people would say Florida, some people would say a couple of other teams and be Houston, but for me, Toronto were the true gatekeepers this season. Very solid team, great performances a lot of the time, but it's never quite enough. They can't beat, those top 4, top 5 teams, and it's frustrating, I'm sure especially for them, their fan base, it's just got to be very draining, because they've had good matchups with a lot of teams. They've taken some early maps off of Dallas. They've had some close ones with San Francisco, but it's just never quite seemed to be enough. And I do think Houston is really good going into this. You could make the same statement about Houston. They've punched over themselves a couple of times. They've taken out teams like Gladiators, like Shock in the regular season. They just haven't done it in playoffs. Toronto just hasn't done it all season. They have made their money beating all the teams that are generally ranked below them. So I got Houston taking this one. I'm gonna say it goes to 5 though. I think it's close. I just like Houston a little bit more. Pelican, he's a nuclear weapon. He can just absolutely destroy anything that you built up for any particular map or series. Extremely powerful. And then you got to talk about the rest of the team as well, because they have a little bit more flexibility now. Bringing in Doge, they have the options for tanks. Obviously Dante has been great on a lot of the different tanks as well. But in the end, like I said, Toronto, very nice season, a lot of great players. Hisu has had some real hot streaks, also had some cold streaks. But this is a great team. I just like Houston a little bit more, and they survived into the next round of the winners. All right, so Dallas is 1, and then Shocker 2, Dynasty 3, and then Gladiators 4. So, in terms of picking, Dallas will be going first. Dynasty 4, Gladiators 3. Gladiators have tiebreak over Seoul, apparently. So, for Dallas, of these teams, that's going to be an interesting one. If Houston's on the, because, they want their revenge game against Houston. I think they're going to stay away from Dragons. I think Dragons are going to be the most dodged of these teams. I got them taking Philly. Philly seems like, for me, are the weakest of those remaining teams. San Francisco being next, I've got them taking Houston. They've had good success against Houston. I don't think they're going to opt for one of the... I don't think they'll opt for Atlanta. Atlanta's also very scary, and Shanghai is, again, mega scary. So Houston just seems like the most logical choice there. Leaving Gladiators between Shanghai and Atlanta. Now, they've had a lot of success against Atlanta this year, but will they test it again, or will they swap? will they go for Dragons? They beat them in the midseason madness. I'm gonna say they take Dragons, leaving Seoul with Atlanta. And that might be surprising for some people. It's like, what? Hunter, talking all the trash about Atlanta, his former team. They 3-0'd him a bunch of times this season, but they I don't want to say they dodged them, but they did pick around them in the midseason madness, and I just have a sneaking suspicion that they're gonna do it again. Atlanta is the team that knocked Gladiators out of playoffs last season, so maybe they'll go for revenge, but that's just a feeling that I've got. So between these matchups, I got Dallas taking down Philly and pretty. I do think Philly snags the map because they have a tendency to do that, but I think that Dallas makes it pretty convincing. I think the majority of people would say that this was the strongest team in the Countdown Cup. They did have a bit of a flop against the Outlaws, in their on land, but I don't see that as a huge issue. I'm going to be honest. Did it expose a couple of small things about them? Maybe. I still think that while their DPS are great, they're a little bit skill capped outside of Genji metas. When it's Genji, and even in Genji metas, they can be a little bit too focused on Sparkle. It seems like the teams that have, and we had this discussion with San Francisco a couple of stages ago, where they were just diverting all of their resources into pocketing and keeping up proper. And it's a good strategy, but in my opinion, and some other people have gone back and forth about this, but in my eyes, if you have a player that's that good, they're going to make plays. They're going to just be insane on their own to an extent. You obviously can't just leave them completely alone, but I think that if you don't give them quite as much attention, divert your resources to keeping everybody else up, and better things are going to happen. It's almost like they're too singled in on this. They're too concerned with making sure that the Genji is absolutely perfect, because while Genji's blade is mega powerful, other teams can take advantage of other neutral fights, when you don't have your blade up. So, if anything, that's kind of it's like the small chink in the fuel armor. But other than that, I think that they're still a better team right now for sure. One of the best in the world. Would not be shocked if they won it all. So I think they take down Philly with relative ease. Seoul Dynasty versus Atlanta Reign. So this is an interesting one. Atlanta previously beat them a couple tournaments ago in 5. I think either way, this one is going to be going down to the wire. I got Seoul, though. They looked much improved. Looked like clearly the class of the East, in their last few weeks of competition. And I think they set up a really fun matchup with Dallas. But it could go back and forth. I really think this one is kind of just a throw your hands up, and whichever team kind of clutches better is going to end up winning it, because I think they're going to just go blow for blow, pound for pound. But in the end, I like Seoul just a little bit more. Shock versus Outlaws. I'm going to take Shock here 3-0. The Outlaws seem to just have a bit of a block with this, and I feel like especially in their second rounds in tourneys, it's just been a bit of a struggle coming off of a win. I think San Francisco is a very good matchup for them as well. They very much so, and I would say one of Kaluja's biggest strengths as a tank player is that they neutralize other tanks. And Dante is a very feast or famine tank. He does a lot of things. He creates a lot of value, makes a lot of space. But when he's punished, Outlaws really struggles. We've seen this in various metas, whether it was Doomfist in the beginning. We've seen more D.Va recently. Dante has a bit of a more aggressive style than a lot of other tanks. Maybe it's because of his DPS background. Who knows? But in any case, I think San Francisco is going to be able to take advantage of that. And despite some of their struggles, in their last 4 or 5 matches of the season, I do think that they're going to, they're going to be rearing to go. They're going to be ready. They're going to be a factor. I don't see them, playing as bad as they did their last few matches. Then you got Gladiators versus Dragons. This is a very interesting one. the Dragons just haven't been mega consistent this year. And Gladiators, they had a weaker schedule, but they just kind of mopped the floor with everybody. They had the rough stretch. They lost 4 in a row a couple of tournaments ago, but this is a team that that's the 2 tournaments they went to this year. They've won. They've proven that they can do it. On this stage, they're comfortable with it. They have a lot of confidence. Happy has been getting better and better. Kevster, in my opinion, I don't know. Shu is probably MVP again for me. Obviously, he didn't win it last year, but I essentially picked him as my MVP. And maybe it's the homer in me, but Kevster has been incredibly consistent. There's a reason why he's an MVP candidate, as well as Shu. I think that tank-wise is kind of the only issues they've had. Reiner kind of tilting and not being great at the Junker Queen meta. Then they put in Space, and they look great their last few matches, of that meta. So I think between those two, they have everything covered that they need to. Great coaching staff. They got everything you need. Shanghai, again, could win it all. But in terms of just straight up consistency, I'm going to go with the Gladiators here. All right, running through some of the eliminator brackets. So for these teams, this is it. It's their absolute last run, or their season is over. If they lose. So unfortunately for London, I don't see them beating the Dragons. Again, this is a stacked roster. You got a former MVP on it in Fleta. And just top to bottom. We've talked about it many times. This is a team that can definitely run the gauntlet and win the whole thing like they did last year. So I don't see them going out 2-0. Sorry, London. And then Houston versus Hangzhou is an interesting one. I'm going to take the Outlaws here, though. I'm going to say 3-0. I think that they bounce back well, from if they do go up against San Francisco and lose. If they're in this spot, I do think that they'll beat the Spark. The Spark, for me, are probably either them or Toronto has got to be the weakest team in this tournament as of right now. They got to really show me something to kind of have more faith in them. But it's just been kind of a steady decline. And unfortunately, unless you've had those, those highs and those lows, it feels like for most teams, once you kind of get on that trajectory, it's very hard to get off of it. I'm kind of predicting San Francisco to get off of that, but even that I feel not confident about. And this is one of the best teams ever, so it's tough. But I do think that Houston they're just a better team right now, and they'll be able to do enough. That's Spark have had some turnover. They've had a lot of swapping up in and out. And the consistency of Houston is just going to be a bit much for them. Atlanta Reign versus Florida Mayhem. Wait, rematch alert. Atlanta in 5. Florida. Again, talking about clutch, I like Seoul's clutch a little more than Atlanta's. I like Atlanta's a little more than Florida's. They've been playing a lot more Hydron now. Moving away from Xe a bit as the DPS partner for Checkmate. A little bit of swapping back and forth, but in the end, while I think tank is really close, support is really close, I like the DPS of Atlanta a little bit more, and I think that is the difference in a really back and forth one. And then Toronto versus Philly. Again, interesting matchups here, but I like Philly. I got them advancing, and ending the season for Toronto. Again, it just comes down to the higher highs. They've had higher highs than Toronto. The Defiant just haven't really been able to put it together completely in any long stretch. And Philly is a team that, while they're beatable for Toronto, I think that they're very even, in terms of success level, skill level, cohesion, all of that. It's just a lot of these, it's who do I trust more? Between all of these middle of the pack playoff teams. These are obviously all really good teams. They've made playoffs. They've won a lot of games during the regular season. Some of them have had some great postseason success. Others, have gotten there consistently, which is still saying a lot. At the top level of the game. So in the end, though, it's Fusion for me, and I got them taken out Toronto. All right, Eliminator round 2, Shanghai Dragons versus Houston Outlaws. We're going Dragons here. I'm gonna say 3-1. Again, Houston is just like the. I think most people would agree the upper echelon, you know, of 5 teams, is Shanghai, Seoul, Dallas, LA, and Shock. You know, some people might argue Shock because of their last couple of their last stage, but I think most people would agree that that's like kind of the top 5. And I just, well, I'm rooting for Houston. They've had a lot of a lot of ups and downs, a lot of disappointments throughout the years. This has been probably their best season yet. But I like a lot of the guys in that team. I think that they are a great example of a somewhat mixed roster. Dante American, most of the other players Korean. But in any case, Shanghai, it's just better. As Diva cheekily says in her new voice lines, skill issue. I think that's just a little bit too much here. Pelican, he has the highs that can absolutely compete with Dragons, but is he going to be in that top tier form? He is prone to have some slumps at times, so it's a little too scary for me to pick Houston here. I think that Shanghai still has more games left in them. They'll move on to round 3, and then between the Reign and the Fusion, I'm gonna take Atlanta. Let's say 3-0. It just kind of snowballs, gets out of hand, and Philly cannot quite control them. A lot of Philly's success, their DPS just really go off, and they enable their DPS, and they just, they go full on carry mode. It feels like that's just hard against Atlanta. It's very hard to do that against Atlanta. I feel like teams that have success against Atlanta, it's more tank focused. They really enable their tank, and using that, they're able to really punish the supports at the front line or the back line, whatever it can be. And you really just kind of, you don't necessarily have a snowball comp, but you have, that cohesion and coordination that your entire team is just absolutely mowing down. It's not just you're enabling certain players, to get picks and create opportunities, if that makes sense. And I just don't think that's really going to work out for Philly because they have more of a pick oriented system. So that brings us back to winners round number 3, Dallas Fuel Shanghai Dynasty. Man, this is a brutal one to pick. I'm going Fuel. I was a little bit high in Dynasty going into the last tournament, and I think that might be what's just tugging at the back of my mind. But in any case, I think it's a really close matchup. I'm going to say 3-1. I think it's probably, every map is very competitive in it, or, one team dominates, and then there's a couple more that are really close. But in the end, I trust Fuel so much right now. This team has been together for multiple years. Majority of Seoul has 2. And for the Dynasty, by the way, what a great trade that's been. The Creative and Iris trade, the swap with Houston, it's one of those rare trades that I feel like has worked out really well for both teams. Iris has been great, ever since coming to Seoul, and Creative, while he played well in Dynasty, feels like he's kind of had a fresh start and is reinvigorated and had some monster games for the Outlaws. So, one of those rare win-win trades in my eyes for those teams. But again, Seoul, still a major player in this, but I just can't pick against Fuel at this point yet. And then Shock versus Gladiators. I'm going to take Gladiators pretty convincingly. I think they set up a nice little match with Dallas. Again, while I still trust Shock to be very good, seeing their dip and coming at the time that it did is scary. I talked about it in a previous video, where I was talking about them and likening them back to Season 1 New York. Who just kind of had a little bit of a limp end to their regular season. And their record was I want to say they were 33-7 or 34-6, something crazy good. They were clearly the number 1 seed, but it felt like they didn't have momentum. They lost a lot of it. Not winning stage 4 playoffs, not doing particularly well in stage 4. People were like, they're just sandbagging, they're taking it easy. But then they didn't really come out to play in the playoffs, and went down to Philly in that one, who was coming in as the 6th seed. So you got to think, okay, how can they really just get the positive, the positive emotions flowing right away? I yeah, they'll be coming off a win against Houston, I think, but Gladiators are just too good of a team right now for them to beat as they look right now. I think they would have to come out with something pretty miraculous to match up. But that does set up the elimination round number 3, where, oh boy, we have Seoul versus Shanghai, loser out. Whew, that's gonna be intense. And same thing, it feels like very much so rivals, this year. Dynasty and Dragons obviously competing for 1-2, and then it feels like Shock and Reign have matched up a lot this season. Atlanta taking them down in the playoffs a couple of times earlier on in the year. Shock with a crazy reverse sweep, this last stage against Atlanta to kind of snatch their hearts out of their chest. These are almost like rivalry matches for me. But in any case, I got Seoul edging Shanghai. I like the Dynasty a little more this year. I'm going to be honest. I think that they've taken to 5v5 a little bit better. Shanghai was better last stage, but overall, I just like the Dynasty a bit more. Again, when they have the DPS like trios that are just like so in sync, it's just, I feel like it's an advantage. And then we're talking about tanks. Smurf just, I feel like, continues to fly under the radar. One of the best tanks, if not the best tank in the league. I think most people would say, one of the best Orissas, one of the best Winstons. Is just super consistent. Amazing at Zarya as well, especially for being like a main tank player. So I think it's really close. It's an awesome match, but I got Dynasty moving on. And then Atlanta and Shock. Taking Atlanta. Maybe I'm a little high on Atlanta. I don't think so. This team consistently performs well in the playoffs. They are loaded from top to bottom. I talked about it in some of their other matchups. They've had some issues, with closing stuff out. But I think that they're going to get it done here. They obviously went to the grand finals last season. So they're a very experienced. They have a couple of new players in there. Give them some of that extra juice. But they also have that core, of experience that have had success in these playoffs. And Shock, a ton of new players. Violet's the only veteran. I think they make a great run here. This is where it's done for them. All right, final elimination round. Setting up with that will set them up with the eliminator finals. So this is elimination bracket semifinals. Dynasty versus Atlanta. Going with Dynasty. I think they get revenge. Take them down 3-1. Revenge from a couple tourneys ago. And get themselves into the last 3. Again, I've talked about a lot of these teams a lot. The teams that have obviously have like 4, 5, 6 matches on here now. I don't feel like I have to go in depth about them. I think Dynasty is better. And I think that they deserve to be in the top 3. And, that doesn't mean anything. Who deserves to be there doesn't mean anything. It just it's just down to how they play now. These next 4 days, 5, 6, for some teams. For some, it'll only be 2. But in the end, again, I think that Dynasty is just going to perform really well. They had that letdown, in the midseason madness, going loss, and I think that they're going to come back from that in a huge way. Dallas Fuel versus LA Gladiators. Winners final. Again, I don't know. A lot of these, it kind of seems fitting, When it comes to Overwatch League, a lot of the time, the teams that have been the best, they just are. As simple as that. It's not a hugely upset-oriented league. And while I hope, that we do have some throughout the weekend, all the money on the line, I got the Gladiators here. When I haven't had confidence in them, they've won these tournaments, and it just feels like they have the best combination of supports in the league. You have 2 of the best tanks in the league. I talked about Kevster and Happy before. It feels like they've really kind of found their footing. I'm super confident in their hero pools, whatever, the best heroes end up being over the next couple of days. And while I think it's a really, really good matchup, I got the Gladiators. Okay, elimination round 5. Dynasty versus Fuel. This one, no, this one is still best of 5. Okay. And then only the grand finals are first to 4. Okay, so first to 3, I got Fuel in 5. I think they set up the rematch. Run it back. Again, all the things I said about Dynasty, I find true and I really believe. But Dallas, I think they're just a little bit better in the end. LA Gladiators, Dallas Fuel. The rematch for it all. On land, running it down in Anaheim. Gladiators in 6. I always say in 7. I think this one is going to be 6. Back and forth. Lining up the DPS, the tanks, the supports. These are the best players in the world. We obviously don't know what's going to happen until they actually start getting in there and what adjustments get made in match. And for me, the Gladiators they've just had the right moxie when it's come to these tournaments. I just can't discount winning those two. Did Dallas win one? Yup. Did Shanghai win one? Yup. Did Dynasty win one? Yup. They could obviously win it all. A lot of these teams could win it all. Honestly, I think half the field in the playoffs could go on and win the whole thing. But maybe I'm just finally going to be a homer for these playoff predictions. A lot of other times I'm like, oh, Gladiators will get really far and then they'll lose towards the end. It just feels like the team this year, and it very much so. It didn't feel like London season 1 really. It felt like New York. Season 2, season 3, it felt like San Francisco is just the best team, and that's exactly what happened last year. Going throughout Shanghai, they're just the best team. They were consistently, and in the end, they ended up taking it down. And I think that's going to be very, very similar with Gladiators here. I think Dallas gives them an awesome run. I think that there's going to be a ton of really, really good matchups, but in the end, I am trusting LA, and we're going to lock in. I am a legal resident. I agree to the privacy. We're sending it in. There it is. We are locked for the playoffs. They're starting today. I'm super excited. I love these style of tournaments, man. The Mid-Season Madness was so fun to watch, and this is only going to be better. So, as always, thank you guys very much for watching. I feel like I say this every single year, but I think I'm going to try to branch out a little bit in the off season with some new projects. So let me know if you'd like that at all, with Overwatch League and going into potentially other games, because I obviously have other interests there as well. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Who do you have winning it all? Do you have the perfect bracket with every single map to the T picked? If you do, big props. But in any case, that is it for me. Wrapping up Overwatch League Season number 5. After the tournament is over, there will be a video talking about the tournament itself and talking about our eventual champion, whoever it ends up being. But, as always, thank you all very much for watching and sticking around for another season of Overwatch League predictions and pick'ems. You guys are awesome. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day, weekend. I hope that your 2022 last couple months ends, the way you want it to. I know, for some people it's been rough. So if you're going through one of those rough stretches right now, it gets better. It really does. So just keep pushing. If you're in a good stretch, hell yeah, enjoy it. But however you're doing, I will quit rambling, and we'll see you guys after the playoffs.